everyone, and welcome to another episode of the UX Research Rundown. This season we're talking about UX research and AI, of course. Everyone has to talk about AI right now. And I've had the pleasure to talk to a lot of very knowledgeable and cool guests, and today is no exception. With me I have Jenny Lowe, who is a UX researcher with a very cool background that she's going to talk about more herself in just a little bit. But she's been at places like Grammarly and Uber and stuff like that. And we are going to talk about some very cool stuff that I think is super relevant in this day and age where people are just like pasting AI everywhere, which is kind of like how UX research can help with lowering the costs of building these things and stuff like that. That's kind of a summary. It's going to be very interesting. So welcome to the show. Thanks for being here, Jenny.
Thank you so much, Henrik, for having me.
Awesome. So, as per ancient tradition in this 3-season-long podcast series, I always ask my guests to start with kind of giving us their origin story. So, if you don't mind, how did you get into research, in general and into kind of AI stuff in particular, perhaps, and kind of what's your way into research and how did we end up here?
Yeah, thank you so much. I think I first started when I was working in marketing research agencies, and at that point, a lot of companies would have, built products and really trying to figure out their messaging to land with their target customers. But only then did they actually learn that who are they actually looking to build this for? This doesn't really make sense, or there are all these issues and problems with it. And I think only from there that I start to really hope for kind of more companies to really build with more of their user needs and problems in mind. So I went and had my master's degree in Master's of Information Management at the UC School of Information at UC Berkeley. And then I went on to really, my background also grew up in Hong Kong, very fascinated about developing technologies in more resource-constrained environments. So then I joined Uber, being the first on their China team, working to scale products 0 to 1 globally, and very fascinated in that space. And then from there, went on to manage some of Uber's more technically complex teams, such as marketplace, responsible for driver earnings and rider pricing, really the heart of Uber's technology. And I think this kind of starts merging the user problem with the business problem and the technology problem in that space altogether. And then with my last role at Uber, being the head of research for the rides business, which is their rideshare, bike scooters, and their B2B offering. And then moving on to Grammarly, where I was leading the research team responsible for user research, market research, and research operations. Grammarly is actually where more of the background in doing AI with research kind of came about. And it's fascinating because Grammarly is and has been an AI communications assistant tool, but in a way that not many people saw as AI in the current form. People think of AI as generative AI, and that definitely has been more the trend as to what people are most familiar with, given the rise of ChatGPT. So definitely at Grammarly, how do we rebrand ourselves? How might we actually also incorporate this new technology that is possible today? And definitely coming with it is a whole host of cost issues, along with understanding user value. And I think a lot of companies are facing that challenge today, and maybe in ways that they have not anticipated until it's too late, until they've built with it. So definitely that's a little bit of my journey, and very excited to talk about that topic.
Awesome. Yeah, I'm super excited to have you here. So, I mean, let's jump straight into it because I find this, building with running a team that builds with AI myself. It's obvious to me this kind of problem that you're talking about, that like if you can very easily just get excited and try to cut corners and skip the research and stuff like that, and then you end up with this kind of monster of extremely expensive what do you call it, consequences, because it is quite expensive to run some of these things. So let's jump straight into that. And what were your how do companies in your experience kind of get into that? Because now we've already kind of given the answer, like you should research and check because this can become very expensive. But I mean, how in what you've seen, like how do people run into this trap, so to speak?
Yeah. I think from my observation, there's a lot of excitement with this new technology. There's a lot of still more lack of clarity as to where and how this could actually solve a user problem. But the excitement is so substantial, and the fear of being left behind is so prevalent. And I think many companies want to be labeled as an AI company or AI, have that capability, almost like a check mark. And so from that perspective, there's a lot of people already skipping the question as to what are we building, what are we serving for the customer, but to the latter question as to how do we incorporate AI. And so I think it's the wrong question to start with because it misses the entire journey of trying to create product market fit. I think it just jumps straight into how do we brand ourselves to be AI, to be relevant in the conversation, to be attractive, so that when people look at us, they think of us as innovative, they think of us as like a company that has state-of-the-art kind of new technology. And I think that in a way, it's much more of an engineering kind of technology first conversation. And so you will see, or in my experience, how this came about to me or in our research is when engineering leaders or members might say, why are we doing or need to do user research? Like customers, and including ourselves, may not even know what AI is capable of doing. So if we were to ask users, what are they going to offer us when we don't even know? Like we are better off creating something and then demonstrating the value to them, and then they'll be impressed and something will stick. So I think that narrative is starting to become very strong, particularly with the kind of excitement and kind of discovery of also what this technology can bring. But unfortunately, this is a classic type of problem. When you are really, the value is not about the pure technology. It's really about the experience that you're offering and solving the specific problem that is actually very painful to the customer. So I think the first step is definitely when a new technology comes around, the narrative within the company shifts. So then how might user research stay relevant? And will the product development cycle completely get flipped and just focus on how are we going to incorporate AI? And I think I see this for some companies definitely very true.
Yeah, it's so interesting because, as you say, none of those things are really new per se. It's more intense now because of this technology, because the excitement about the new thing is probably higher than or bigger than what it has been for other new things in the past. So that's like kind of it's enhancing that, and this this narrative of like, well, users don't even know what like this new thing is, so we can't ask them about them. That sounds a lot to me like this old classic like misconception about what user research is. It's that kind of like, well, if Henry Ford would have asked people faster
Correct.
horses, all that is that kind of thing, right? But it's kind of on steroids with this type of technology. So I find it super interesting, and I wonder what are kind of what's the antidote, would you say, to these tendencies, that now we see on steroids, but that have been around for a long time?
Yeah. I think that is definitely a very central question because I think that it does entail that user research needs to offer a response to that change in narrative. And the research toolkit also needs to adapt to the ways that it is going to be more expensive to build a prototype. It's going to be much more important to offer a stronger confidence signal of product market fit or kind of like user value assessments. So I think that starts to gear towards some of the methodological toolkit development in assessing AI products or assessing what type of problem is adequate for AI to be supported versus not. I think that some of the main things that research can really offer in this trajectory is definitely first, where oftentimes I see overlooked is that deep down with AI products, there's a lot of assumptions baked in as to what users are willing to trade off. And I think the very beginning would be the type of data. And some types of data are just completely not possible to share. And the type of value that they are perceiving to get back in return doesn't weigh the type of security and risk that they might incur.
Right.
And so this was definitely one of the lessons that we also learned at Grammarly. There was a product that we've been thinking about and kind of built with certain assumptions as to whether users would share this type of data. It wasn't until, we did certain studies and also got some beta customers, it's just not possible. But I think that the sequence and kind of reflecting back is making sure we're doing more of that conversation and assessment upfront, rather than having built to then start learning and that cost has already incurred. And it is labor intensive because of this technology is very new. You have to overspend more people in order to develop this type of technology. And so there are definitely more understanding around the data privacy and kind of like angle. One of the painful things we learned is people were not willing to share that type of data, and it was just not going to be something they're comfortable with. And so that was a very big learning. I think another is also about, even if you are classic user research, focusing the user problem and all else will follow, there's also problems there too. Because, for example, Grammarly learned that, users really want to make sure in their generative output that it is not as robotic. Sometimes it's very unauthentic. I want it to sound closer to how I write, the way I write, my voice or my style. And it's a very true problem. It is also partially caused by the technology itself, but the problem is there. And you can spend many engineering cycles to work on it, but only realizing it's very expensive to maintain and to launch. And so this is a different user problem, a situation for user research, which is focus on the user problem and then all else is fine. Like, actually, no, because the solution now, we also need to look deeply. When it's too expensive for the company, the solution is also not sustainable. And so even if you pick the right problem, or the problem is, substantial enough, you should solve it. The solution also needs to be more studied. So that's one of the also impetus for this conversation is like we may have classically looked at the problem, but now it's about, is it painful enough? What's the magnitude of that pain? And how are we thinking about the different types of solutions? Do we really need AI, or what level of AI do we need?
Yeah, it's almost like a classic, when you hear your sales team or someone come back and say like, hey, like customer X would love this, but you don't, and then you're like, oh great, let's let's understand that problem and build that. And then it turns out, yeah, they would love it, but they don't want to pay for it, because they don't love it that much, so it's kind of like that classic problem. Makes me realize, I love these two examples, by the way, the kind of cost for the company because you develop something that then turns out to be impossible because someone doesn't want to share data. And the other one is like, well, we really understood the problem and we really understood like how to build a solution, but it just became too expensive to run the solution. Are there other types of, when we say like it can become costly, are there other types of costs to consider here, or are those kind of like the main two?
Mm-hmm. I think that costs in the solution, or like costs in the what area of cost?
No, I'm thinking like, if I would categorize this, like I would say that the first cost that you mentioned, if I understood it correctly, it's like we get excited as a team about building a solution for customers, that it turns out that because of their view on what data they can share, for example, actually the whole thing just can't be done because we're not allowed to share that data, so we can't do it, right? And then the cost is that we've lost all of this development time and all of these development resources and everything to build something that actually can't even work. Like that's one type, right? And then you have this thing where you build something that actually does work, and that customers actually do want, and they're like, oh wow, that's super cool, and it does work, but you can't afford to run it because it's too expensive to pay the API bill to OpenAI or something, right?
Yeah.
So those are kind of two. And I don't know if there are more, but I was wondering like if you've seen, are there other types of hidden or like unforeseen costs that could become foreseeable if we just like take one step away from the excitement and think it through a little bit, right?
Yeah. I think those are definitely the more substantial ones. I think I could imagine also like, I think some companies may not as easily understand the reputational cost. So, for example, it is that initial hype that pulls someone to label themselves with AI, but it does come with a reputational cost downstream. Like, how are you going to, the types of risks that AI comes with, the types of, for example, with Grammarly, is really important to cater to the student population for plagiarism, for example. So how are you evaluating the potential upside, but the downside if you don't do that aspect well? Like, are you also at a reputational risk for being on this AI trend, and needing to make sure that you are serving your customers and delivering and mitigating the risks and harm that AI could pose on someone? So it's a reputational risk and something that companies really need to understand their customers and kind of mitigate in order to kind of pursue. And I think there also is this kind of an invisible cost, or kind of hypothesized, of getting excitement or kind of getting customers, and unclear on how much customers are willing to pay. I think that is definitely the more grand cost, as what we will classically think as, am I going to get money? Are people going to pay at the end of it? And I think that that is definitely very, very challenging, particularly when the entire industry is being flooded with uh, funding for these AI capabilities. Things are now
Yeah.
at a cost, not a true cost, and we kind of see it sometimes at Uber, for example.
Mm-hmm.
Uber's true costs, for some of its, for early days, it grew with a lot of promotion, with a lot of, driver incentives, and really to build up the network. And once you have the
Yeah.
scale, and then you develop the behavior, and then you're actually starting to introduce the true cost. Here, I can also try think that this might be similarly happening, but at the same time, one moment you're gonna have to show the true cost of this technology, and
Mm.
the customer will then say, am I out of it, like, because it's not serving me, or yes, I'm still going to pay for this Uber ride because it is a truly solving an important problem for me, or else I can't get to like destination B.
Yeah.
So I think that is also a really big, from the reputational cost as well as the actual cost, that
Mm.
that people are having much more challenge to identify.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, very cool. Very cool. I could not have figured out those. That was great. I'll add one if I. It's so interesting to hear you talk about this because it just goes to show that if you think a little bit about these things, if you take a step, what I like with research is that it challenges these assumptions that we really want to believe. Right? We're excited about this thing, and just talking to users can actually help us kind of reality check a lot of our excitement and things. And this is just this the discussion we just had now really I think shows how that can also be done without even doing new research by actually just like kind of reusing research. So it doesn't have to be doesn't or just apply like research thinking to it almost. That sounds a little bit like a paradox, not like a contradiction, right? Because it's like research is something you do with customers. It's not a theoretical exercise. But I was wondering if you could still though kind of like what are some of the ways that then research could help understanding some of these costs up front and kind of mitigating some of these risks, that you could kind of if you listen to this and you feel like, yeah, this makes a lot of sense. My team also fits perfectly this description right now. They're super excited and they don't want to hear from me. Like, how would you go about, like, what's your advice to researchers who are in that situation, and like how do they go about trying to insert their research wisdom in this and try to help their team?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think that is definitely where the discipline of research and some of the value, right? The response to some of that narrative shift as to why do we need to do user research if people might not even know what is capable from AI technology. I think that the value comes up front where really focusing on where the customer problem is, and but the problem being dissected out further to explain, is this a problem that is like, how painful is it a
Mm-hmm.
problem that has existing solutions that are solved against it, and how cumbersome is some of these solutions to solve for it. Are they willing to pay for a better solution to actually solve for this problem? So then it starts to unpack the problem more as to how bad are existing solutions, and how painful is it, like, are
Mm.
people better or not, in some, the benefit in some of this kind of AI hype is that you actually have a lot of analogous products. There's a lot of people out there being well funded, like funded, and everyone's trying out different solutions. So it's likely that there are actual startups or companies that have a similar, kind of prototype or product at a stage. And in studying that, are people actually paying for that type of prototype, and how if it's solving a similar tangential problem, they've already spent the cost up front. So how are people thinking about paying for that product? I think that those are some of the classic kind of research, but both from a kind of using our toolkit to unpack the problem, understand the magnitude of the pain, the willingness to pay, as well as using more kind of competitive types of research work of how other people might be experiencing their shopping experience. How are they thinking about their buying? Because I think at the end of the day, you're trying to get at the trade-off question. How are people thinking the value that they're going to get for the type of price that they have to pay? Is this actually, how are they doing that calculation? So I think that research is very good at unpacking mental models and how people are kind of doing this kind of calculation in their mind. So I think that those are some things that research can do, and really being able to, from that problem and now moving on to the solution. So being part of that solution development is also very helpful, because you can tell the company that this problem may have a lower level of magnitude of pain, such that we probably want to be much more careful how deep our investments go with AI in this particular problem space. So in the discussion about finding a problem and using AI, and I think that it's now you want that matching. Like, it's not as painful, maybe for a certain subgroup, like for this certain population is extremely painful, then I think it starts to help to craft where level of the investment for AI should be. And I think that being part of that solution development and assessing that is going to be very helpful. And definitely it means for the researcher, how are you involved, not just with design, but understand, be there, be present with your engineering partners, like hear a little bit more as to the challenges that they're coming up with. And I think it's a very exciting opportunity to really think about co-creating in a space that we may not have been as familiar before. Working closely with engineering to understand, hey, if we do, if we keep asking the user for different types of prompts or refine their prompts, this rises our costs because each prompt is very expensive.
Yeah.
Well, one of the things that we considered doing at Grammarly was we have an improve it button that actually combines several tasks into one. It almost improves the user experience, making it much easier. And also it could, potentially think about how might we reduce the amount of back and forth that the customer might need to do with the chat. So I think that this could also be a way to improve the user experience and find ways that will actually improve the amount of costs in order to run it. So definitely there's a lot of new ways to explore doing research in this solution development phase as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And this also makes me think about, very often the cost of not doing research is kind of dumped on the user, and then only eventually kind of on the company, because the users leave the company theoretically, like if there are better options, right? But in this case with the re-prompting, it's like if you have an experience that ends up in a bad AI output, then you're gonna have to re-prompt and like actually not getting that right and having like an unsatisfied user with a bunch of opportunities to like retry. Like usually that cost would just be on the user and it's their time of all the retries, but now it's so clearly like dumped back on the company. So I wonder if this is almost like a good lesson. Companies that don't get this right, they should deserve to pay that cost a little bit so they learn from it. Perhaps it's a healthy thing in the long run. If perhaps it's too harsh, but
that's so funny. That's so funny you say that. I think that could be a very fascinating signal and opportunity too. I think
Mm-hmm.
like what you're mentioning is where in the experience are we actually, one is pain and could one be cost? Like,
Yeah.
it would be
Yeah.
very
Mm-hmm.
fascinating. I think that, I think traditionally user research may have kind of shied away from a lot of this kind of cost conversation and really focusing on delight and making user experience very intuitive. It's still true, but I think
Mm.
that the equation of how to be a researcher, a very strategic researcher, in a conversation that is increasingly kind of removing user research as part of that, I think the cost is an important one to put yourself back in that room into that conversation as to why user research is going to be very valuable. And the most valuable could you be is that you actually help the business make money, reduce their costs,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
make the right investments. I think that, yeah, to the point about bad output, it is so painful when I watch videos and obviously of observation of how people are using AI that, hey, I've spent so much time, about 10 minutes, like trying to figure out how to talk to the, kind of prompt in order to get the output that I
Mm.
want. To write this email, it's almost better off I just write this email. So I thought that was
Yeah.
such a fascinating equation of like time and effort. And are we actually making a solution that is helping people versus actually making things much more cumbersome as a result?
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, so interesting. But so if I interpret you correctly, you don't. I would say then that you are not one of those that worry that AI will replace UX researchers. It's rather we're going to need more UX research. Is that the a correct interpretation?
Yeah, yeah. Um, I think that my belief here is that the narrative and kind of conversation in the industry has not reached what we're talking about right now. And I think the
Mm.
conversation also has not been realized that this is a potential ability that research can do.
Mm.
And definitely, more important is I don't think that there is there's going to be that worry on costs, and it's going to happen. And it's just
Mm.
about who has the deeper pockets right now, and maybe they care less if they're really
Yeah.
well funded. So I think it's definitely um, where the conversation is going to shift. A skill set that I think user research should be more prepared with and ready,
Mm.
right? Ready to how to tackle understanding AI privacy and trust. How do we deal with that and investigate? How are we able to offer better perspectives of the upside and user value, but the cost that a company might need to maintain? How do we actually work closer with some of the design and engineering counterparts to kind of prepare us for us not to be replaced? It's very hard, I think, with AI or not, to just build products that have product market fit and really
Mm.
solve a problem for the user that is very painful, that they're ready to pay, and those things are always going to be true. And I don't think AI can help you in many ways to maybe understand, from your problem discovery, maybe how are you, the micro tasks within it. But at the end of
Mm.
the day, I think it's very hard to say as a complete function, we're going to be replaced by AI, but more like our function also needs to evolve, but in what direction would be involved. And I think that I'm also looking very closely at like, companies like OpenAI or companies like, are are they going to build a user research function? Like, if so, what would that look like, for example? I think that there's a lot of different signals we can look at where how might the discipline evolve in this kind of new trend moving forward.
Yeah. Yeah. Definitely. And it's interesting how I want to try a thought I just had on you. See if this is Accurate. I was very fascinated to see, like in our own experience with all of this stuff, I realized that we got a little bit lucky with this stuff. Like we also got very excited about AI, and I was definitely one of those companies that wanted to make sure that when our customers and like new prospects and stuff like that wanted to check in to see kind of what we were about, ask themselves like, is this going to be an AI company? Or like, are they going to use AI? I wanted them to think, yeah, of course, like Lookback is AI. This is great. So I was definitely in that risk category, and I got very excited, and I wanted to really push on this and everything. And I think to some extent we got a little bit lucky. My CTO is like, oh, it's just hype, and he's very cynical about these things, so he didn't get as excited. So I think that dampened it. But I realized also that one thing that really saved us was that we've done so much research over the years. Like it wasn't a new research question for us. It was like we've done so much research on what kind of the core problems are. So when a new technology comes along, it's not a new research project for us. It's like we've already done the research over time to understand, well, if what are the things that are now possible that we know are well-known problems, because we've done the research on that. What are the things in that kind of on that list of things that this technology now offer us a way to solve that wasn't possible before? So it's also kind of like a great reminder, I think, but I'd love to hear your thoughts on it. Perhaps I'm just like a little bit biased and I want research to be super important here, but it seems to me that like the more these technology landscapes change, and the more there is change, and the more there's new ways of doing things, and AI is a great example of that, the more important it is that you've actually done your research continuously, so that you know what what the key things are, right? And then it's not a problem that you're excited about it, because you don't need to do new research. You can just think it through from that perspective. So I don't know, am I kind of biased and exaggerating this, or what are your thoughts on that?
I absolutely agree. I think that is the best position, because what this means is that you have invested over time to know that this is the tried and true, most important and painful problem. And I think that oftentimes these startups now are kind of doing the flip side. Is like, I want to incorporate AI, figure out the problem, right? And then now it's we know from investments over time and doing research, I know that these are really, the top kind of the most painful problems that users have. And now you can go one step further, is what are some of the capabilities that AI can offer to be helpful in solving for this? Are we strategically unique to offer this if we were to incorporate that? And I think that was also an exercise that we did at Grammarly when ChatGPT came about, and we reviewed all the different research, previous research, the critical user problems that we have, and what is likely to be solved by ChatGPT. What are some of the things that Grammarly is uniquely capable to do, and what is relevant for our category? What would AI be potentially useful to solve? And we also got a very interesting dimension here, is what did users feel like they wanted to keep doing themselves? What do they enjoy doing? And what are the tasks that they want to do, or tasks that they were like quite clear that I just don't want to do it. I don't want to do formatting. And certain things that was very clear. And I think that that was also a very helpful angle to start moving beyond that, people who are maybe having that flipped conversation and decision making versus people who have done the research work to kind of move much further along and make the right types of investments for the problems that's most painful and needed.
Yeah, awesome. So now we have reached that point in the podcast that I warn all my guests about, that like we could talk about this for hours, but we're running out of time. But I do have one more question here. So I love you bringing this perspective on this question. I mean, there's so much we can talk about, but I think this is something that people forget about in the excitement. So I think it was great that we had this conversation on kind of the costs that research can help discover and mitigate the risk of. Are there other things when you listen to conversations about AI and UX research and just AI in general, incorporating that into all of our products, because that's what everyone is trying to do now? Are there some things that you have been thinking about that you see as perhaps obvious risks or something like that, that we're not really talking about, like other things similar of this nature that you recommend that people reflect a little on in this? Big question, but
I think that it is there's a lot of potential harm. I understand that the AI is capable to do, and I think it's about how the company is positioning themselves on the types of investments for transparency, for safeguarding for the users' interests, and and not to overlook their data privacy and kind of trust. And so I think that the obvious risks that one might, I do worry is that there is excitement, there is such an assumed belief that the value is so substantial that the risks that people or we might impose would be overcome. And I think that equation and that journey that people have, it means that risks are always for the customer is evaluated a little too late. And I think that that's not, and it's obviously, it is a new technology, but the way that we want to make sure is how do we bring that more in the product development cycle? How do we bring that into the conversation? And I think user research is very effective at bringing the users, what are they going to be excited about? What are the value? What are the risks downside? And I think that needs to be less, too often. And I think my biggest worry is if it's now put in the downstream of their product development. Now, how do you bring that up front, much more front and center? So I think it's really about asking a lot of companies where to sequence the types of investigation and how to bring it much more forefront into the decision-making process. And it's too often, right, if someone says, oh, it's such a rare case that this might happen, but you do not want to be one because we all know and have seen it all over the news when there are those risks. Yeah. It's very damaging to a company. And at that point, it's that's the reputational risk, and you jumped into it and you didn't quite figure out the right response from the very beginning to how to safeguard your customers.
Yeah, very, very wise. I think we'll let the conversation end on that very relevant point. Thank you so much for being with us today. I've learned a lot, and I'm sure that our listeners are going to love this episode. So thank you very much. And to everyone out there, happy researching. It's exciting technology. We shouldn't be afraid of it, but we should use our powers to do the right stuff in the right order and actually build some great experiences instead of taking the wrong risks and messing things up. Trying to summarize. Cool, awesome, happy researching everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye.